weekly podcast that shows up every 2 to 3 weeks if we're lucky. This is Beyond Sunday Morning, with special guest Jared Elrod. Welcome back to Beyond Sunday Morning. Really excited to have Jared Elrod with us. Jared?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I'm glad we've done this before, just so everybody knows. So if we're like, oh yeah, we've already talked about this, and or we slip, we actually did it. The internet messed us up. It was totally my fault, and so Jared's really great about coming back with us and having an important conversation about authentic ministry, especially with young people. So Jared, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then we will begin talking about authentic ministry.
Cool. Well, my name, like it says, Jared. I run a YouTube. I have a website called YouthFactor.us, and then a YouTube channel that I'm really working on building out with the same thing, Youth Factor. And essentially, I kind of do vlogs, I guess. They're like vlogs, but I record them with video about different youth ministry topics. And I'm actually partnered up with one of my students who's also in the video, and I'm kind of getting back into my roots of comedy sketches and visual effects type videos to start bringing, creating videos for youth. So those will be rolling out pretty soon, where other youth pastors who are tired of trying to find a new Rhett and Link video that's appropriate for youth can actually grab one that was designed to be played as an opener or an example in youth ministry. So,
yeah, it's funny. Actually, I have friends who are friends of Rhett and Link.
Okay, yeah, because they're not too far from this area originally before they went down to LA.
Yeah, no, they were at I believe NC State is where they got to meet other people. Okay. So, yeah, so I will be sure to send along your criticism of them.
I love Rhett and Link. I watch it with my kids, or my daughter loves them too all the time. But it's an ongoing, it's almost like a joke with me and, like I said, my kind of my new partner, we're working on videos, because I've seen it so many times in like different Facebook groups where they'll be like, hey guys, I need a video for tonight. Does anyone have any playlists? Anything? I'm tired of Rhett and Link. We played like all those, and so it's just kind of like that joke with you pastors. It's like, well, there's Rhett and Link, and then anything else you can find that's clean.
That's right. There you go. Well, so let's talk a little bit, and it's really awesome that you're doing that. I really believe, all in all, that you should get Clayton on your sketch comedy. He is a funny-looking guy, and he's not joining us today. He's being a bum. So I'm glad that you're here. It just takes up the level of our production that you're here and he's not. So, do you want to comment at all on that?
No.
No comment. He pleads the fifth. So, with that being said, I was at a conference recently, and it was really interesting. It talked a lot about authentic ministry, and one of the things really bothered me about it, and for me it was this idea of cell phones. And we basically got this whole conversation going with young people about, and of course these were not young people, even though the guy who brought it up originally was not that old. He was probably about my age. And he said, one of the things that bothers him the most is that students are using their cell phones. And so he believes that we should take them all away anytime they come into church and have an electronic Sabbath. And I'll be honest with you, that drove me crazy. And I said something, and I shouldn't have. I should have just let it go, realized I was never changing this guy's mind, that the people in there probably were not going to agree with me. It got on a 20-minute conversation about how terrible it is that young people have cell phones. And I'm like, but this is the new generation. This is what they do. Yeah. And oftentimes they're not being rude. It's actually harder for them to sit there and go, I just need to tell my mom that I forgot to do something, or what time to pick me up, or whatever.
Well, heaven forbid, they're like Googling something you said. They're like, what does that mean?
That was going to be even better. Like, they have a question. Instead of interrupting you, they just Google it real quick, and then they're all set.
Yeah.
So I was just like, you can either embrace cell phones and technology to create a more authentic youth group, or you can create this artificial environment where nobody really wants to be at, because you've told them that something that is important to them that they've grown up with is not important, and therefore it sets them off. And it's kind of like walking into a church the first time and seeing clutter and mess everywhere. it might sound like a good idea, like, oh, well, that's Aunt Betsy's, Grandma Betsy's, pile of stuff. And you might be okay with it, but it's weird and it's off-putting. And why do we need to be off-putting before, a young person comes and wants to experience Jesus through
there's
worship
no
or through
stigma
study?
as it is just going to church and thinking of all that, and you walk in. I mean, my thing is I see it as a two-part kind of issue. The first one is, I know I talked last time, but it's like, for a lot of youth, like their cell phone, teenagers, that's the only thing they have like control over.
Yeah.
They, depending on their home life, they don't have their own car most likely that they get to control. Depending on what school they go to, they don't have 100% control over their wardrobe, whether it be from school dress code or the parents won't buy them the $150 pair of jeans they want to wear and to really express themselves. My sister went through that in high school. I remember those conversations.
Now, do you buy your children 150 pairs? Okay,
No.
I'm just double checking. Because I was going to ask you to buy me 150 pairs.
Okay. There's just so many things, right? Like that they don't have control.
You're right.
So like back in the day, like in the 80s, you watch like the old 80s cartoons or whatever, the sitcoms you see. It was like The Room, right? They slam the door, and then it's like do not enter, all that kind of thing. That was like their level of control. Well, to me, like I fully believe, I've heard this, I believe it, that the cell phone is like that. It's their connection to their friends. It's their way to connection to the rest of the world. It's their way to identify and kind of express themselves, and it's something that they have control over. And so then they walk in a youth group, something they're already a little bit like, I don't know, right. Church. And then you're like, oh, hey, first off, I want to take the one thing that expresses your individuality more than anything else. And it's kind of a safety blanket. Like you're probably holding it not because you're being rude, but because maybe you're a little uncomfortable because you're in a room of 20, 30, 50, 100 kids that you don't know.
Right.
And so you're like, got your cell phone, like, well, if I look at my cell phone, I know at least what to look at. It sounds awkward. Okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm doing something. Like, hey, give that out. Give it over. Right. And then they've got like, what if it gets lost? What if it's broken? My parents need to call me. So you're just increasing anxieties. And I gave it, to me, I used the analogy of, as youth ministers, we need to be breaking down walls. And so that's like building a wall. You're like, okay, very first, before you even come in our youth ministry, before you consider our drama program or our trips or just anything, here's this first wall, this first hurdle you have to get over. And to me, that's just like a big difficulty. And I understand that takes me to the other side. I understand why, because it makes it hard. It's distracting if you're like preaching and you feel like you're trying to get across. You look out and there's kids like down on their cell phones. But then to me, like that's kind of the lazy way. It's kind of like, rather than like going, you know what, let me evaluate myself. Let me figure out how I can get better. Let me maybe look, all those kind of things. How can I engage them? Maybe it's something I'm doing. What is it? Maybe we need to be more interactive. Whatever it is. It's like, let's take the easy way and let's just take all their cell phones.
Right. Well, and let's be honest too. It's the easy way of saying, okay, so my messages aren't that interesting. Everybody's on their cell phones. So, let's just take that away. And then, it's crazy. And if you were to do that to adults, if when we came to church, if you were to say, okay, now everybody, I want your cell phone. You can put it here in a nice box. It will look great. It won't get damaged. You can pick it up at the end of service. I mean, you would have people going crazy at you. I mean, you would, and listen, I know adults. I know that none of you ever text or do anything on your cell phone during church. It just drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like one of these things, as you said, and I think your conversation about, it's control, it's great. It's true. I mean, this is their way of maintaining their control of being an individual, and it's important. And instead of taking it away, I mean, we can get into dating and sex and all that kind of stuff, because I think that's the easy answer to it, which is, we're going to scare you to death, so don't do it. Instead of talking about, okay, so let's talk about what God's plan is. Let's talk about how to be a sexual person in a healthy way. We need to do the same thing with cell phones and technology. We can talk about ways in which it can be healthy for you to use this at youth group and healthy ways to be able to take care of stuff instead of, if I see your cell phone, I'm going to take it away. It just doesn't help. It doesn't work. Yeah. And as you said, I think it's lazy. Now, Clayton disagreed with us.
So we didn't invite him back.
So we never didn't invite him back because that's what we agreed on. If you disagree with us, you get kicked off.
Yeah, we'll take your Skype away.
That's right. Yeah, he's been grounded. So he's in his room. It says, "Beware, do not enter," and that's where he is right now.
That's funny.
No, he's actually just not feeling very well, so that's where he is.
It's funny. So the last time I actually just kind of gave the generic antidote of like, oh, you don't do it. You're in church and you pull out your phone, you check something, so you don't even pay whole attention. Well, since we had that conversation, I went with a couple of my youth students. Now they're older seniors and college age kids, and we went to Chick-fil-A, and they have that cell phone challenge. And we were doing it as a prank on this one kid because he had left his phone, and we thought he went home to get his cell phone. So we're like, let's do the whole, they have this challenge now where you put your phones in this like chicken coop, but it's just like a box. Sure. And if you leave it there and you actually engage with each other and you don't sit on your cell phone, they give you free ice cream. So I said, hey, let's mess with him. I think the reason they're late is he went home to get his cell phone. So when he gets here, we'll make him put it right in this box and say we're all doing this challenge. So they get there and we do it. We all put our phones in it for this challenge. It was the hardest thing. The anxiety at our table, like the one guy had an Apple Watch and he spent the entire time staring at his wrist. Every one of us, at least 6 times, reached for our cell phone and panicked. It was like, where is it? I dropped it. Oh, it's right here. And it was just like all we did, we talked about not using our cell phones the entire time because it was like and it blew me away because I would have been like, yeah, I can go without my phone, no problem. I don't know how many times I checked to see if my wife had texted me, if I had gotten a Facebook update, yep. And just out of a habit, it's like, oh, there's a slight lull in the conversation. Let me grab my phone. Where is it? And it was in that box. So that was probably the most expensive ice cream any of us had ever had.
There you go. Most anxiety causing. And you
yeah,
get an ice cream, and that should literally be something that does not cause anxiety.
No.
Because I love ice cream.
Yeah.
Especially Chick-fil-A ice cream. But I hear what you're saying. And I think realizing that, again, that is what's going through their head instead of worshiping Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
it's not like it's magic. You take it away and they start paying 100% attention. They just maybe even getting that anxiety, tripping out a little bit about like, where is it? What's going on? Who's messaged me? So I think it has a counter effect rather than solving the problem.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. What are some other things? Anything else you want to talk about as far as authentic ministry with young people?
Yeah, I think you touched a little bit earlier about how, you mentioned like the dating sex thing. Just something that I'm noticing is that there's so much of things that we do talk about in church, and then it's funny because anytime I discuss something, like I had a Sunday school just lesson the other day where a kid asked like kind of like an apologetics question where someone's like, well, if God exists or if the Bible's true, how do you explain and rattled something off? So we spent like the rest of Sunday school kind of unpacking it, and there's a few things I said that raised eyebrows. And they're like, well, what about this? What about this? And it's like, I think by not being authentic, and sometimes, whether it's as a leader, like we only want to talk about certain topics, or whether it's, we don't want to expose certain things in our own life, we kind of narrow in what we discuss. And I'm noticing that we're having this very narrow view of Christianity. And the problem is anytime life kind of throws us a right hook, then the kids are like, well, this isn't what I see. Like I make the comment all the time, and I'm waiting for a parent to like come in and be like, hey, what did you? Yeah. But I'll be like, guys, you realize like Jesus like isn't the hippie Jesus that society tells us about. He doesn't just walk around just healing everyone and this and that. Like you gotta remember, and I start giving Old Testament examples, start giving stuff, and it's like. And the kids will just look like, wait, what are you saying? And so this idea, I think, a lot of times of just talking about what's comfortable to talk about and not opening it up, not taking advantage of whether a tragedy happened or any of these things. Like my wife and I are very big on being authentic, and I mean, obviously not inappropriately so, but talking about things in our own lives, struggles we've gone through, and it's just interesting to see the response when we do that, and then how we're able to cut through a lot of stuff. So I think a part of it too is just this idea of having to. I've seen it not just as youth pastors, but even in the entrepreneur world. This idea of like the Instagram effect, like you have to show everything as being super successful, and we don't talk enough about the when we have issues, when we have problems, and so then they don't know how to navigate that because they just know how to navigate, like you said, the certain issues, the dating, the sex, the being blessed by God, and certain doctrinal things, but when all of a sudden their life starts to fall apart, they're like, well, my youth pastor never told me about what to do when God disappears and doesn't feel like he exists anymore. Yeah. So I think that ties back into all that authentic type conversation.
Well, and I think one of the things, too, is to go and take them out and to go and have lunch, outside of youth group.
Yeah.
And to not be afraid when they come up and say, you know, I all the time, my students, especially my high school boys, they would curse in front of me by accident. And literally you saw the anxiety in their face. Like, I was like, you know, I prefer you not to use that language, but it's not the first time I've ever heard it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that in that moment, that was something where, you know, it was amazing. It's amazing to think what they think of us. Like, oh, you know, you never heard, you know, somebody say, oh, hell, or, you know, we go around literally like Ned Flanders, like, Jolly Gee Willikers, Jared. Like, let's sing Kumbaya together to close out this podcast.
You know, I almost didn't get a job because of that once. When I was leaving a youth ministry position and nothing was opening up, and I actually was applying for a job at a car lot. They were like ready to hire me, but like my second interview, he kept coming back to the topic of like, you know, there's, you know, they can swear, they can say some crude things. And finally I realized, like, you know, this may be the kicker here. So I go, look, listen, it's not going to bother me. I don't swear.
Right.
It's like, you realize, like, I'm not a senior pastor. I was a youth pastor. Right. I've heard probably more than any of these guys on the lot are going to throw out. It's like, you know, like my last youth ministry was primarily an outreach ministry where we're dealing with skate kids from, you know, bad backgrounds. It's like, I've heard it all. These guys aren't going to offend me just because they say a few things. As long as they don't expect me to join in, you know, like, we're not going to have a problem. And he's like, oh, okay. You know, it was funny just to see, like you said, that Ned Flanders, like, oh, is he going to quit after 2 days because he's going to hear them say something?
Well, it's funny. When I was at Virginia Tech and doing my major, I majored in sociology and concentrated in crime and deviant behavior. Okay. And oftentimes when we would do group readings and things like that, they knew I wanted to be a pastor, most of the people in the class. And oftentimes they would say, oh, you know, because we had this book, it was in their own words, and so it's interviews with different criminals and stuff like that. But oftentimes they'd be like, oh, Drew, why don't you do the reading for, you know, the heroin addict? Hey, Drew, why don't you be the serial killer this week? Hey, Drew. And so, I mean, you have to read it. I'm like, oh, gosh. And so it was funny. I mean, they were kind of playing along with it. So, you know, so now I have to joke around. I say, yeah, you know, I've had to read, you know, all kinds of stuff. But it was funny, and it's funny to think what people think of us. And I think the part of it is that we are called out and called to ministry. We're not separated from the world in a way that makes us unrelatable and just not healthy at all, that we can't even handle it when somebody uses a bad word in front of us. And I think, again, for people to know that, you know, you can do that and you can be yourself in front of me. I won't join in, as you said, because I don't feel like that's something I need to do. But at the same time, I'm not going to be uncomfortable and love you any less because you're authentically who you are. And I think that's what young people need, is they want to feel that they can come to someplace and be loved for their authentic self, and then they'll grow into a more faithful disciple of Jesus Christ. And not that they're not already a disciple of Christ, but I think we all have room to grow. And coming to a place where you can be authentic, where you can feel love and be comforted and allowed to make mistakes is so important for them at that age.
Yeah, and what you mentioned earlier about, like, you know, going outside of youth, having lunch, I'm a big believer in that kind of stuff, so I feel like they need to see, especially the young men, like you talked about, because, I mean, statistically, just so many of them don't have either any or a good role model as a father. So a lot of times, like, what does it look like to be a Christian male? Like, what is my role? How is this supposed to be? So to be able to, like, actually be in life situations that aren't just, like, youth group games or a message. I've always been big on, I actually was privileged my junior year in high school to kind of go to this experimental film or school program and take a film class, and they're big on, they had this idea like, well, you know, maybe project-based learning is better than just textbook-based learning. And that's kind of stuck with me. So it's like, okay, so yeah, not to say, you know, ditch the midweek service, but what if we actually did stuff with people, you know, like, so I like to have different things. Like, I'm big into media, so I've always had a media team where we actually went out and we made short videos and we actually worked and they learned skills, and then we got to work around each other, and then things would come up and they'd ask a question, or I'd see things and we'd navigate around all kinds of issues that they're never going to talk to me about in the middle of, like, you know, 30 other kids on a Wednesday or Tuesday, whatever day you have your service. and stuff would come out. And my first ever youth before I was even a youth pastor, I was the media director for our church. And it was kind of a known thing. I mean, we had a youth group of 14, 12 of them were in my media team. And it was kind of funny because people knew, like, so if someone was having some issues, I remember two of the girls coming to me and going, hey, so-and-so is kind of being a jerk. Like, I don't know what's going on, but he's taking it out on us. He's, being a bit of a jerk. And so, like, they would get there to media class, and I'd be like, hey, call your mom and tell her I'll give you a ride home. And they all knew what that meant. That meant, uh-oh. And so they'd call, hey, mom, he'll bring me home. And so we'd have, like, a little bit, like, basically, like, a one-on-one kind of discipleship counseling time on the way home. And then, if we needed to, we'd park out and just talk. And I'd be like, what's going on? It's like, oh, yeah, I know, I realize I just haven't known how to stop it. But we just talk, 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's like real, actual one-on-one. And it all comes out from that relationship from doing the other stuff. And they get to see me in real life. We have kids over to our house as much as possible. They get to see my interaction with my wife, with my kids.
Yeah.
That's something that knocks down so many walls, especially for kids who don't have a strong home life, to come over and see how you treat your family. And then, like, that'll build trust like nothing with students who aren't buying in and aren't thinking you're being authentic, just because of your job title,
Right.
and the nature of it. So yeah, just that kind of stuff. I feel like I can break through months, if not, a year or more of relational stuff, like doing one-on-one stuff versus actually just doing, okay, see you next Wednesday. Okay, see you next Wednesday.
Well, and I tell you too, and we need to get wrapping up here, but I agree with you 100%. Having them come, be in relationship, because the cool thing about young people, about middle school, high school, and college age students, is that they're passionate. They're excited about life. And if you take the time to authentically invest in them, to love them, to care for them, and allow them to be themselves, they will remember that for the rest of their life, and it will set them on a trajectory to, again, really understand what it means to be a Christian. And when they need help, they know that they can come back and talk to you about anything. And they will do anything for you, too, is my experience. So, I mean, I've been I left my youth ministry job 2 years ago, and I still have students all the time that want to know when I'm coming up. And again, I have to watch those boundaries. I can't say, oh, I'm here, But they know that if they ever needed me, if there's an emergency, that I would be there for them and be able to help them. And their current youth director is the exact same way as well, that they knew that they could be there for him. And so that transition was really good for them.
That's good.
But they will run through walls for you if you're authentic with them. So anything else? Any last thoughts?
Just be authentic.
I agree. Well, Youth Factor, we'll put the link for your YouTube channel and your website. And you are at Jared Elrod, right? On Twitter.
Yes.
So, and I'll put that right here because we have our little cloud thing that comes up.
Cool.
And so we'll be able to do that as well. But thank you so much for hanging out with me and having this important conversation. It's been
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you.